When you get in fear, you forget the things that God has told you. You forget that God has already said, don't be afraid, that I'm with you. You know, it's funny because we forget all of these awesome battles. Now, one of the amazing things is here that David forgot, God just had him defeat Goliath, this huge giant. Do you guys remember that story, David and Goliath? Where he was confident, he was bold, he wasn't afraid of this giant. This huge, colossus man, that had an army of men behind him. And David went out there all by himself to fight him. Wasn't even afraid. But yet here's aging Saul, just some, king that God has already said is done. And David's running away from him, fleeing from him. Now I want to point something out to you that we just read here, and you might have read over it pretty quick. In 1 Samuel chapter 21, where we read, where did David, it says in verse 10, it says, David arose and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. That's easy to read past that. Did you guys even notice that when you were reading it? King of Gath. Who was from Gath that David had fought just about 3 chapters before? You guys know? Goliath. Goliath was from Gath. I don't know if it's so okay. Well, why does that matter? Well, where's David fleeing to? The king of Gath? What does David have in his possession? The sword of Goliath. Now, this is one of those things, this is my opinion on this, and this is what I read out of this, because when you finish the story, and we're going to go into it more here in a second, what do you think David's doing here? I mean, he's taking a sword to try to fight. Well, why is he going to Gath with this giant sword that he can barely hold? Was he going to go fight the king of Gath, running from Saul? No. He's not going to Gath to fight. He's not out to have a battle. What's he doing? He's hiding. He's fleeing. He's trying to get away. And he's trying to find a place where he can, have refuge and feel a little better. So where does he go? He goes to Gath with the sword of Goliath. Now, what do you think's happening here? Whenever you get into fear, those things that you had defeated at one time, those devils that you stood up against and you just stood against them and you defeated them in the name of Jesus. Those things that seemed that, that you knew that they were under your feet, in the name of Jesus you were done with them. That you don't have to worry about, paying your bills anymore. You don't have to worry about sickness and disease anymore. That thing that was, you don't have to worry about that oppression. You got past that, but then when you got into fear, the first thing that you do is run back to that thing and try to make it right. I always hear people say, "Oh, don't stir up the devil. Don't stir up the devil. Don't get him mad. Just leave him alone." And I see David going back with the sword of Goliath to try to make peace with that thing that he defeated, that thing that stood as being this thing that's totally against God and totally against God's will in David's life, that he was running back to this thing to try to make peace with. When you get into fear, you'll run back into the world and try to make things right with the world. You'll try to, I better stop giving, because if I stop, if I keep giving, I'm not going to have money. If I don't have money, I can't pay my bills. Or no, I better start really worrying about my, this situation with the doctor says, and I better do this and do that. And, I don't know if God's going to work this time, or whatever it is, we get back into the world's way of thinking. We forget that God has said we're not of this kingdom. We're beyond this. We're above this. But when we get into fear, it's like we dig back down into it, and we start making peace with it. We start making excuses. Oh, I can never change the way I talk. That's the way that I am. I can't help it. Or I can never change this. There's a spirit of poverty. I mean, I'm going to get on this for a second because this bothered me this week. There is a spirit of poverty. There is actually this mentality. You see it. I mean, I'm not pointing out certain cities, but if you live in certain cities and you walk down certain streets and you talk to certain people, you see the spirit of poverty, that people just think this is all they can have, and they can never have any more. They don't think they can be successful. They don't think they can go any further. That's why you have 3rd, 4th generations of welfare recipients, living off the same way that their parents lived, trying to just barely make it, never thinking they can go any further. I can't ever finish college. I can't ever get a vet. It's that spirit of poverty. And that people get comfortable in it. People just accept, just take it because they think that's what, and that's not what God has for us. That is not what God has for us. When we get into fear, we get back into this comfort zone, and this place that we try to make peace with the things that at one time we defeated. We try to make peace with them, and we try to get comfortable with them. We try to find a place to where we can get protection when God is telling us to stand up and fight. God never told David to run away. Now the amazing thing is look what happens here in verse 11. On his way to try to go make peace with this king, having the sword of Goliath, to try to say, hey, here's the sword back. I'm sorry about what happened. I'm here. I need to join your army or whatever. Saul's trying to kill me, and I need some protection. I need some help here. You ever heard the saying, the enemy of your enemy. Oh wait. The enemy of your enemy is your friend. There you go. Yeah. Well, that's kind of the way I think David was looking at this. The Gaths didn't like David or the Israelites at all, really, that much. I mean, they fought a ton of battles. But it's funny because here he goes to try to make peace in verse 11, and here comes the servants of this king Achish and says to him, "Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing of the ones who, and they also dance, saying, Saul has slain his thousands, but David his 10,000s?" And David took these words to heart greatly and feared Achish, king of Gath. His plan wasn't working. And it says basically, so he had to act crazy to get out of the bad situation. And they're like, well, why did you bring this guy here in verse 14? He's acting like a madman. He's like, don't I have enough madmen? Get this guy out of my presence. And then look at chapter 22, verse 1. And so David departed from there and escaped to a cave in Aldum. And when his brothers and all his father's household heard of it, they went down to him. And look at what this says here. And everyone who was in fear, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him, and he became captain over them. Now there was about 400 men with him. Now, this is do you guys see this? And I'm going to when you get into a bad situation, when you start getting into the defeat mentality, when you get into fear, and you let fear dictate your life, worry, doubt, all that stuff, what happens? Next thing you know, you end up finding people that feel the same way as you. You notice that? When you start talking negative, you'll find other people who will talk negative with you. When you find people who want to talk about how horrible their life is and, I don't know what I'm going to do, I don't know how I'm going to get another job, I don't know how, I'm probably going to get fired and get laid off, and then somebody else, oh yeah, I feel that way too, oh yeah. Well, that's what happened here. David, in this fear, and I love it says that he drew everyone to him that was in fear, that was in debt, that was discontented. These were people that were messed up, and they wanted to get right, and David became the captain of them. David became the captain of them. This is not where God wanted him. This was not God's will. God's will was for him to take over the kingdom. But he fled. He ran. He was afraid. He was in fear. And he was in a cave, hiding out in a cave somewhere. And his family comes to him. And, this whole thing, you see this, that fear will drive you away from God's purpose and plan for your life. Fear. I was thinking yesterday, when we went to State Fair, we were on those little sky bucket things, I don't know what you call them, they're like the ski lift type things, you're sitting there, and I was thinking, how nice it looked when you're up there, it's like, wow, you see all the rides, and you see all, it was nice, and then later